Today I read from the lecture of Swami Vivekananda from the ninth volume of his complete works. The title of the lecture is History of the Aryan Race, a Gyano Yoga class delivered in London, England on Thursday morning, May 7, 1896, and recorded by Mr. Joshua J. Goodwin. Then I start reading. As you know, all the Swamiji lectures are very long. I don't know so far I shall be able to read the complete thing, but at least few pages I shall try to read. And if you are interested for the remaining portion, you go to the original volume, ninth volume. Thank you. I start reading. I have told you how I would divide the subject into 4 yogas, but as the bearing of all these various yogas is the same, the goal they want to arrive at is the same, I had better begin with the philosophical portion, the Gyano Yoga. Gyano means knowledge, and before going into the principles of the Vedanta philosophy, I think it is necessary to sketch in a few words the origin and the beginning and the development, the words, sketch in a few words the origin and the beginning and the development, the historical portion of that system. Most of you are now familiar with the words Arjo or Aryan, and many things have been written on these words. About a century ago, there was an English judge in Bengal, Sir William Jones. In India, you know, there are Mohammedans and Hindus. The Hindus were the original people, and the Mohammedans came and conquered them and ruled over them for 700 years. There have been many other conquests in India, and whenever there is a new conquest, the criminal laws of the country are changed. The criminal law is always the law of the conquering nation, but the civil law remains the same. So, when the English conquered India, they changed the criminal law, but the civil law remained. The judges, however, were Englishmen and did not know the language of the country in which the civil laws were written, and so they had to take the help of interpreters, lawyers of India, and so on. And when any question about Indian law arose, these scholars would be referred to. One of these judges, Sir William Jones, was a very ripe scholar and he wanted to go to the fountainhead himself to take up the language himself and study it instead of relying upon these interpreters who, for instance, might be bribed to give any verdict. So he began to study the law of the Gentus, as the Hindus were called. Gentoo is probably a form of the word gentil, used by the Portuguese and Spaniards, or heathen as you call it now. When the judge began to translate some of the books into English, he found that it was very hard to translate them correctly into English at first hand. What was his surprise when he found that if he translated them first into Latin and next into English, it was much easier. Then he found in translating that a large number of Sanskrit words were almost the same as in Latin. It was he who introduced the study of Sanskrit to the Europeans. Then, as the Germans were rising in scholarship as well as the French, they took up the language and began to study it. With their tremendous power of analysis, the Germans found that there was a similarity between Sanskrit and all the European languages. Among the ancient languages, Greek was the newest to it in resemblance. Later, it was found that there was a language called Lithuanian, spoken somewhere on the shores of the Baltic, an independent kingdom at that time and unconnected with Russia. The language of the Lithuanians is strikingly similar to Sanskrit. Some of the Lithuanian sentences are less changed from Sanskrit forms than the northern Indian languages. Thus, it was found that there is an intimate connection between all the various languages spoken in Europe and the two Asiatic languages, Persian and Sanskrit. Many theories are built upon it as to how this connection came. Theories were built up every day and every day smashed. There is no knowing where it is going to stop. Then came the theory that there was one race in ancient times who called themselves Aryans. They found in Sanskrit literature that there was a people who spoke Sanskrit and called themselves Aryans. And this is mentioned also in Persian literature. Thus, they founded the theory that there was in ancient times a nation of people who called themselves Aryans and who spoke Sanskrit and lived in Central Asia. This nation, they said, broke into several branches and migrated to Europe and Persia, and wherever they went, they took their own languages. German, Greek, and French are but remnants of an old tongue, and Sanskrit is the most highly developed of these languages. These are theories and have not been proved yet. They are mere conjectures and guesses. Many difficulties come in the way, for instance, how the Indians are dark and Europeans are fair. Even within the same nations, speaking these in England itself, there are many with yellow hair and many with black. Thus, there are many questions which have not yet been settled. But this is certain that all the nations of Europe except the Basques, the Hungarians, the Tartars, and the Finns, accepting these, all the Europeans, all the northern Indians, and the Persians speak branches of the same language. Vast masses of literature are existing in all these Aryan tongues, in Greek, in Latin, in modern European languages, German, English, French, in ancient Persian, in modern Persian, and in Sanskrit. But in the first place, Sanskrit literature alone is a very big mass, although perhaps 3/4 of it has been destroyed and lost through successive invasions. Yet, I think the sum total of the amount of literature in Sanskrit would outbalance any 3 or 4 European languages taken together in number of books. No one knows how many books are there yet and where they are, because it is the most ancient of all these Aryan languages, and that branch of the Aryan race which spoke the Sanskrit language was the first to become civilized and the first to begin to write books and literature. So they went on for thousands of years. How many thousands of years they wrote, no one knows. There are various guesses from 3000 BC to 8000 BC, but all of these dates are more or less uncertain. Each man, in writing about these ancient books and dates, is first of all prejudiced by his earlier education, then by his religion, then by his nationality. If a Mohammedan writes about the Hindus anything that does not glorify his own religion, he very scrupulously pushes to one side. So, with the Christians, you can see that with your own writers in the last 10 years, your literature has become more respectable so long as they, that is the Christians, had full play. they wrote in English and were safe from Hindu criticism. But within the last 20 years, the Hindus have begun writing in English, so they are more careful, and you will find that the tone has quite changed within the last 10 or 20 years. Another curiosity about the Sanskrit literature is that it takes any other language has undergone many changes, taking all the literature in these various Aryan languages, the Greek or the Latin or all these others, we find that all the European branches were of very recent date. The Greek came much later, a mere child in comparison with the Egyptian or the Babylonian. The Egyptians and the Babylonians, of course, are not Aryans. They are separate races, and their civilizations antedate all the European civilization. But with the exception of the ancient Egyptians, they were almost coeval with the Aryans. In some accounts, they were even earlier. Yet, in European literature, there are certain things to be accounted for. The introduction of the Indian lotus on old temples, the lotus gangetic. It is well known that this only grows in India. Then there are the references to the land of Punt. Although very great attempts have been made to fix that land of Punt, P-U-N-T, on the Arabs, it is very uncertain. And then there are the references to the monkeys and sandalwood of southern India, only to be found there. The Jews were of a much later date than the Greek Aryans. Only one branch of Semitic race of Babylon, and this nondescript, unknowable race, the Egyptians, were much older than the Aryans, except the Hindus. So this Sanskrit has undergone very much change as a matter of course, having been spoken and written through thousands of years. It necessarily follows that in other Aryan languages, as in Greek and Roman, the literature must be of much later date than Sanskrit. Not only so, but there is this peculiarity that of all regular books that we have in the world, the oldest are in Sanskrit, and that is the mass of literature called the Vedas. Mass of literature called the Vedas. There are very ancient pieces in the Babylonian or Egyptian literature, but they cannot be called literature or books, but just a few notes, a short letter, a few words, or so on. But as finished, cultured literature the Vedas are the oldest. These Vedas were written in the peculiar archaic Sanskrit, and for a long time, even today, it is thought by many European antiquarians that these Vedas were not written but were handed down by father to son, learned by rote, and thus preserved. Within the last few years, opinion is veering around, and they are beginning to think that they must have been written in most ancient times. Of course, they have to make theories in this way. Theory after theory will have to be built up and destroyed until we reach truth. This is quite natural. But when the subject is Indian or Egyptian, the Christian philosophers rush in to make theories, while if the subject is nearer home, they think twice first. That is why they fail so much and have to keep on making fresh theories every 5 years. But this much is true, that this mass of literature, whether written or not, was conveyed, and not only that, but is at the present day conveyed by word of mouth. This is thought this is thought to be holy. You find in every nation, when a new idea, a new form, a new discovery or invention comes in, the old things are not brushed aside all at once, but are relegated to the religion of holiness. The ancient Hindus used to write on palm leaves and birch bark, and when paper was invented, they did not throw aside all the palm leaves but used to consider writing on palm leaves and birch bark holy. So, with the Jews, they used to write only on parchment, and parchment is now used for writing in their temples. So you find when new customs the come in, the old ones become holy. So this form of transmitting the literature to the Vedas from teacher to disciple by word of mouth, although antiquated and almost useless now, has become holy. The student may refresh his memory by books, but has to learn by word of mouth of a teacher. A great many modifications will always gather round such a fact to make its holiness more rational. But this is the law. But this is the law. These Vedas are a vast mass of literature by themselves. That is to say, in those ancient times, in every country, religion was the first ideal to spring out of the heart of man, and all the secular knowledge that men got was made over to religion. Secondly, people who deal with religion and in latter times came to be called priests, being the first thinkers of every nation, not only thought about religious subjects but secular matters also, and as such all knowledge was confined to them confined to them. These masses of knowledge, both secular and religious, will always be gathered together and made into a vast mass of literature. In much later times, this is the case. For instance, in studying the Bible of the Jews, we find the same thing. The Talmud contained a vast mass of information on all subjects, and so did the Pentateuch, Pentateuch. In the same way, the Vedas give information on various subjects. They have come together and form one book, and in later times, when other subjects were separated from religion, when astronomy and astrology were taken out of religion, these subjects, being connected with the Vedas and being ancient, were considered very holy. Almost the largest portion of Vedas have been lost. The priests who carried it down to posterity were divided into so many families, and accordingly the Vedas were divided into so many parts. Each part was allotted to a family. The rituals, the ceremonies, the customs, the worship of that family were to be obtained from that respective portion of the Vedas. They preserved it and performed all the ceremonies according to that. In course of time, so some of these families became extinct, and with them their portion of Vedas were lost, if these old accounts be true. Some of you know that the Vedas are divided into 4 parts. One is called the Rig Veda, another Jojur Veda, another Shamo Veda, and the 4th Atharva Veda. Each one of these again was divided into many branches. For instance, the Shamo Veda have 1000 branches, of which only about 5 or 6 remain. The rest are all lost. So with the others, the Rig Veda had 108, of which only 1 remains, and the rest are all lost. Om Sri Ramakrishnaarpanamastu. Kindly, for the continuation of reading by yourself from the original text, please. Om Sri Ramakrishnaarpanamastu.